Good morning. I now call the order the meeting of the directors of the New York Liberty Development Corporation for Tuesday, September 1st, 2015. I'd like to note for the record that I'll be the acting chairman for today's meeting. Further, I would like to note that this meeting is being webcast and that we welcome public comment on the items on our agenda. The directors have received the relevant written materials in advance of today's meeting and are free to ask questions at any time. Before we begin with the substantive portion of the meeting, I would like to ask the directors whether anyone has any potential conflict of interest with respect to any of the items on the agenda. If so, I would ask that you please make an appropriate disclosure on the record at this time. We'll then be sure to have you recuse yourself from that discussion or vote with regard to such items or items. Are there any recusals? Great. Hearing none, our first order of business is the approval of the minutes of the directors' meeting of March 5th, 2014. Are there any questions, comments, additions, or deletions with regard to the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you very much. Now, Jonathan Byer will present all the remaining items on today's agenda. Jonathan, please begin by presenting the next item, which is a request for authorization to adopt the established team of underwriters, financial advisors, and financial product providers for the corporation.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. In March 2012, the New York State Urban Development Corporation, doing business as Empire State Development, advertised for and subsequently selected a rotating team of underwriters, financial advisors, and financial product or swap providers to assist in the sale of bonds. This action today seeks the adoption of that Empire State Development approved pre-qualified list, which would make these firms available for future recommendation to the Liberty Development Corporation for retention as the need may rise, without the need to conduct a further solicitation. No individual firm is being recommended at this time for retention in connection with any particular matter yet, and no funding is being authorized. Rather, this pre-qualified list is being requested to be approved, which will save time in selecting these professionals in the future. Just some background on the ESD solicitation so that members have a sense of what was involved. The solicitation was to a very broad audience. ESD placed an advertisement in the New York State Contract Reporter. It also advertised in the Bond Buyer, posted a notice on its website, emailed the RFP to over 300 representatives, and the ESD Office of Contractor and Supplier Diversity sent the RFP to 66 MWBE firms. As a result of that, and the basis of overall rankings from the responding firms, the recommended group of underwriters is now comprised of 14 senior managers, 21 co-managers, and 9 selling group members. All these underwriters are listed in the attached Schedule A to the materials. In addition, the 3 firms for financial advisors eligible to serve were also selected, and finally, 5 firms were selected as financial product or swap providers. Accordingly, at this time, directors are requested to approve this ESD slate of underwriters, financial advisors, and financial products swap providers so that the Liberty Development Corporation can utilize this same list.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Are there any questions or comments from the director in regard to this item?
I just have one. Pretty straightforward process. I've done this, used this before, but once they get recommended and they're in a pool, how is that general selection done as you have a need and you're reaching out?
Well, we try to comply fully with the state procurement law, which allows us to select. Generally, what we try to do when appropriate is to have what we call a mini RFP process, where we'll select 3 or 4 providers or 3 or 4 contractors, whatever the case may be, and we try to interview them and select in that group. Oftentimes, there are very specific reasons why a particular underwriter or group of underwriters might be selected. Sometimes it's we try to rotate the business around. Sometimes a particular underwriter has particular experience in a general area. We had this, which is going to come up in a later matter, with some of the bond counsel, we just interviewed them and said, what's your experience in this particular area? So we try to do that when it's appropriate, but this list that we're now approving, since we've gone through the contract reporter process and all the other process, we always comply with that, and we, to the best that of our ability in individual circumstances, we try to do a narrow selection.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Tom. Any other questions for the directors? Are there any comments from the public with regard to this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second?
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Any opposed? Hearing none. Jonathan, please present the next item, which, among other things, requests authorization for the corporation to proceed with the preparation of documents in connection with the issuing, refunding bonds of a portion of New York Liberty Development Corporation's revenue bonds.
Thank you. The corporation issued $1,265,000,000 of its Liberty bonds in 2005, and another approximately $234 million of its Liberty bonds in 2007. These proceeds were lent to Goldman Sachs Headquarters, LLC, also referred to as the borrower, to finance the construction of the now fully completed Goldman Sachs Global Headquarters building located on West Street in Lower Manhattan. The bonds were secured solely by a guarantee agreement from the Goldman Sachs Group. The borrower now wishes to refund approximately $22 million of these bonds. The transaction is expected to be a public offering at a negotiated price, which will effectively extend the maturity of these bonds. Prior to starting work on these bonds, staff is now seeking the consent of the board on some preliminary matters, specifically certain documents. The current bonds are intended to be refunded mature on October 1st of this year. Accordingly, the documents must be drafted and approved to complete the refunding prior to such date. Staff is requesting consent by the board to commence drafting these documents. An additional meeting of the board is anticipated to occur during the third week of September, so that the board can have an opportunity to approve the final form of the documents. In addition to the documents, we also have to comply with certain federal tax law requirements applicable to bonds. Specifically, federal tax law, or TEFRA, requires a hearing prior to the sale of certain private activity bonds, which Liberty bonds are, and it also requires an approval from a senior governmental executive, in this case the governor, to approve the transaction. The governor's approval is intended to be obtained immediately following the hearing, which is scheduled for, I think, September 17th. 18th. Finally, and this is consistent with the action the board just took a few moments ago, an affiliate of the borrower, namely Goldman Sachs & Co., has been selected as the underwriter. This underwriter was selected for its extensive experience in all aspects of municipal finance, its extensive experience as an underwriter on other corporation Liberty issuances, and its responses and ratings in the pre-qualification process. The corporation also took note that GS is an affiliate of the borrower, and the borrower requested the corporation make this selection. Borrower will also have the option to select other co-managers from the pre-qualified list, including an MWBE firm. In fact, our current requirements is that the borrower is required to include minorities and women in this engagement. Accordingly, the directors are asked to authorize the preparation of these bond documents, compliance with federal tax law regarding the hearing and the governor's approval, and select this underwriter.
Any questions from the directors?
I've got just one. The selection of Goldman Sachs presents no conflict since the borrower is an affiliate of theirs.
No, we are disclosing it, and the bonds are being offered to the public, so they're under all kinds of securities regulation to provide fiduciary duty. So we're not concerned that there's any conflict.
Thank you.
Jonathan, the other question I have is, considering the large amount of original Liberty bonds were issued for this project, refunding only $22 million. I'm curious why just that relatively small amount.
The actual senior underwriter, Marvin Marcus, has sometimes questioned why such a small amount is being refunded. But from what I understand is that small chunks, and this is a relatively small chunk of the deal is coming due, and to try to remarket just that separately can be difficult. And so the idea is to try to consolidate it, extend the maturity and consolidate it into a larger package for sale. And I don't know, Arthur, am I getting that correct? We have a representative from Goldman here.
That's basically correct.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other bonds that are mature in 10 years, or is this the only swath that is?
It's not a snow but I believe that, is there, how many more bonds are due in October?
22,695 are due October 1.
There's no other bonds?
No other bonds.
Okay.
And then the next stated maturity is 20 years after that.
Oh, okay, now I get it, now I understand. They're gonna wrap those in.
Yeah.
You're probably gonna extend this another 10 years probably to get it in the.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Okay.
Gotcha. That
That
explains
makes
why
perfect sense.
we're taking the action today. Great. Any other questions for the directors with regard to this item? Hearing, if not, any other comments from the public with regard to this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. I'll now ask Jonathan to present our last two items, both of which relate to requests for authorization to enter into contracts for co-bond counsel in connection with the issuing of those refunding bonds for a portion of New York Liberty Development Corporation's revenue bonds. Unless someone objects, I'll ask the directors to hold their votes until both items have been presented.
Thank you. So, as we've just discussed, Goldman is refunding a small portion of their Liberty bonds that were previously issued. In conjunction with that, we are now seeking the consent of the board to hire two firms. One is Mintz Levin, and the other is Gonzalez Saggio, which is an MWBE firm. These firms were selected from a pre-approved list. In April 2012, the staff of, again, Empire State Development Corp. Vetted and selected a slate of pre-approved counsel. On March 5th, 2014, this corporation adopted that list of pre-qualified counsel, and both Mintz and Gonzalez remain on this list in good standing. Staff recommends the retention of Mintz as bond counsel based on a number of factors: knowledge and expertise of the firm, prior satisfactory work which the firm has performed for ESD as well as Liberty, the rate proposal, and the pre-qualification process. In addition, Mintz was the same counsel that represented the corporation on both prior issuances for the Goldman Sachs Global Headquarters, and their familiarity with Liberty bonds and transaction documents will enhance the quality and efficiency of the representation. For the reasons stated above, borrower also requested that Mintz be retained again for this refunding transaction. Finally, Mintz is a national firm with experience in all facets of bonds and related matters. With respect to Gonzalez, the co-bond counsel, similarly, this firm was chosen because of its knowledge and expertise, its prior satisfactory work for ESD, its rate proposal, and the pre-qualification process, and in addition, a subsequent competitive solicitation of three other pre-qualified counsel specific to this transaction. For all these reasons, staff recommends the retention of Gonzalez Saggio as well for this transaction as co-bond counsel. This financing is a conduit financing with no Liberty bonds no Liberty Development Corporation funds at risk. Accordingly, the borrower will fully fund all counsel costs and expenses. Counsel will generally work at their typical rates. Mintz has offered us a 15% discount. Gonzalez will work at their normal rates. The source of funding will be an internal imprest account funded by the borrower. A pre-financing agreement will provide for advance funding by the borrower with the obligation to replenish the imprest account whenever the balance falls below $75,000. Accordingly, the directors are asked to authorize the retention of both Mintz, Levin, Cohen, Ferris, Glovsky, and Papio PC, as well as Gonzalo Saggio and Harlan LLP, in an amount not to exceed $250,000, which is is the cap on both firms' total fees. Based on the foregoing, I recommend approval of both these counts.
Thank you, Jonathan. Are there any questions or comments from the directors with regard to either of these two items? Tom?
So these retainers are with Liberty Development Corporation.
Exactly.
Money's coming from Goldman.
Correct.
Is an MWDB goal of 30% one of the drivers behind this?
Yes.
Okay, so you haven't specifically apportioned out the 250, but that would be...
That is our goal,
Goal.
and we set the goal in the retainer.
Okay.
It's a goal, and based on our work with both these firms before, we really are not, we're not concerned that the goal won't be met.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you have any
But you've got, I'm sorry, you've got contract terms specifying that you're letting know what the goal is?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's in the retainer.
I know they're deeply experienced, which is why primary driver, I would think, that they were selected again. The borrower has requested them, and the borrower is going to be paying them. Do we have any concerns about any conflicts, since they are actually representing a different party who's paying them, and they've done work for them before?
I mean, that issue comes up in every conduit financing, not just for Liberty, but for other state and municipal entities that have adopted sort of this form of conduit financing. So it is a concern, but ultimately, legally, we are the client. These are, all reputable national law firms that are aware of their fiduciary duties to treat us as the client. So, although
I'm sure that we get assurances that they've done conflict checks internally as well.
Yes, that they have. So, I mean, it's a very genuine concern, and a lot of people sort of when they first hear about it, raise a question, and it's a valid question. But our past experience has been that they recognize that we are the client. One thing that sort of, in my mind at least, mitigates against that is that it's their money on the line. It's not our money on the line. We are giving them a very valuable commodity, which is basically tax-exempt financing. In this situation, they're coming back to us. So there's an incentive for them of self-interest to do the job right, not to abuse any privileges or confidences. So it has worked out satisfactorily, and it is a model that's used actually throughout the country, basically because federal tax law requires an issuer. Otherwise, Goldman Sachs could issue their own bonds, but federal tax law requires an authorized issuer. So we have to create this issuer. So we're a conduit. We're in the middle. We are the client, but our own self-interest is really just to get the project done, because it's achieving in this case a public purpose that generally would not be a public purpose, but for the fact that federal law created Liberty bonds, which extended the definition of public purpose after 9/11 to include things like an office building. Generally, going forward, without another disaster, we will not be providing conduit financing for office buildings or hotels or projects that really aren't clearly associated with a public purpose.
How often is this used, this type of mechanism where they're recommending somebody, they're paying for it, but they're on the hook to us?
We've used it in every Liberty bond transaction. I know that the city, which also had half the allocation of Liberty bonds, that they're a conduit as well. There's really no other way to effectuate the purpose of a congressional legislation giving basically New York State and New York City the power to issue these bonds without engaging in some sort of conduit financing. So I don't know that if the board was uncomfortable with it, I don't know that without doing some research, I don't even think there is an alternative.
I wasn't going down the path of saying undo, but I was piggybacking on George's concern, because in my experience with certain transactions, the most egregious behavior occurs on an individual level. So the importance of checks and balances to make sure that there's no untoward conflict occurring that could influence it. That's my concern. I'm not questioning the fact the vehicle you're using and the way you're doing it, as much as we probably have to crank up that check and balance to make sure we don't have an individual abuse. city time contract, okay? Just take a look at that, and it was just individuals abusing it, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions. It was pretty egregious. That's all.
Okay.
I'm not saying that's anywhere near this. That's not what I'm saying.
No, okay. Well, if it does provide some comfort, it's interesting that the cast of characters that worked on this bond transaction exactly 10 years ago, it's essentially the same cast of characters. So everyone has been in the business, has been, steadily standing by their prior work. So there is more of a comfort level in a transaction like this where it's a refunding, and it's all the same players are coming back to the table 10 years later. Okay.
But could I also add that, when we go through the transactions here, we are intimately involved in reviewing the documents as well. It's not, we just don't, send off, the document review to the outside attorneys. We're also very much involved in reviewing the documents as well.
And the decision of what outside attorneys to hire is our own decision. We make it completely independently. They can make a recommendation, but we don't have to follow that recommendation. In this case, Mintz Levin was involved in the initial transaction, is very familiar with it. We're talking about a relatively small refinancing, the cost of another law firm to get up to speed in order to handle the transaction would be high, and the work product and our confidence in Mintz Levin is high. So there was no reason for us to question the quality of their representation to us. But we do not just take a recommendation and go with it. We do our own independent analysis and make a determination of what law firm will represent us most effectively.
Well said. Thanks, Liz. And,
Yeah, I don't need you to defend the process. That was terrific. Thank you. But it's really what Tom said. It's the individuals I'm more concerned about. That's why I think a representation from the firm that they've internally done the check. Now, they may be persons that go sideways, but we've locked in the firm in that regard. We've made them responsible then for those actions by requesting that they conduct those kinds of things. So things should happen. I know they'd be responsible anyway, but I just like belt and suspenders.
Right.
sure.
No,
Agreed.
in this area,
Yeah.
you're absolutely legitimate request.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Are there any other questions or comments from the directors? Are there any comments from the public with regard to these two items? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval of both items.
So moved.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Terrific. There being no further business, may I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in today's meeting.
We'll trade roles next time.
I'll sit over there.
And thank you all for
No,
making
thanks.
time. I appreciate it. Really.
Which I did. Yep.